One of the biggest companies in streaming has quietly taken a very different approach to remote work. Business Insider reported in late 2025 that Netflix hasn't set a company-wide worksite policy. Teams decide whether employees are remote, hybrid, or office-based. That sounds like flexibility. But when you look closely, it also reveals something interesting about how many large companies are actually using remote work today. Hey, if we haven't met, I'm Alex Wilson Campbell's AI twin. Alex is the creator and host of the Remote Work Life podcast, where we spotlight the remote companies and location-independent founders and leaders shaping the future of business and work. Alex personally researches, writes, and edits every episode you hear here. And I'm his AI voice, so you don't miss the updates, even if he can't get to the studio. Netflix sits in an interesting place in the remote work conversation because its approach is neither strict return to office nor fully remote. And when you look at how that model actually works inside teams, it reveals something much bigger about how large companies are competing for talent today. To understand the current situation, it helps to look briefly at how the company arrived here. Back in 2020, the then co-CEO Reed Hastings publicly expressed skepticism about remote work, saying it had clear downsides compared with in-person collaboration. That thinking influenced the company's early push to bring employees back to offices during 2021 as restrictions were reduced. But the story did not end there. Over time, Netflix moved away from the idea of enforcing a strict company-wide rule about where work should happen. Instead, the company gradually settled into something more pragmatic. Today, Netflix effectively operates a flexible, team-driven hybrid model. There is no universal requirement for a fixed number of in-office days. Instead, individual teams and their managers decide how often they meet in person and how much remote work happens. In practice, that means the experience of working at Netflix can vary significantly depending on the team you join and the type of work you do. Some teams operate largely remote, while others spend more time together in an office environment. Engineering, data, and design roles appear to have some of the strongest remote flexibility. Many employees in those technical functions work mostly remotely, and some hires are made outside the company's traditional hub around Los Gatos. That reflects a practical reality of modern technology hiring. Software talent is global, and companies competing for engineers often have to accommodate distributed work arrangements. Other roles inside the organization naturally require physical presence. Film and television production, studio work, and on-set roles all depend on people being in a particular place at a particular time. Those jobs remain location dependent, which means Netflix ultimately operates with a workforce where some functions are flexible by design and others are not. Underneath this operational structure sits the company's well-known cultural philosophy of freedom and responsibility. Rather than focusing on strict schedules or tracking where employees sit each day, the emphasis tends to be placed on outcomes. Teams are expected to deliver results, and managers are given considerable freedom to organize their teams in the way they believe works best. Instead of setting universal quotas for office attendance, the company's guidance leans toward trusting teams to decide how they collaborate. From an operational perspective, this produces a hybrid model that is looser than the structured policies seen at many large companies. One engineering team might operate almost entirely remotely with occasional in-person meetups. Another group might choose to gather regularly in an office because the team feels it improves collaboration. For employees, that means the day-to-day reality of work is shaped more by the expectations of a specific team than by a central corporate rule. For managers, it also means responsibility shifts downward. Instead of enforcing a policy set by headquarters, leaders inside each team decide what rhythm of work makes sense for the projects they are running. For knowledge workers in digital roles, This often translates into a routine where the office becomes optional rather than mandatory. Meetings, planning, development work, and collaboration can all happen remotely if the team decides that approach is most effective. At the same time, Netflix has not presented itself as a remote-first organization, and rightly so. The office remains part of the operating system, particularly for teams that value frequent in-person interaction. The result is a model that sits somewhere between two dominant approaches in today's workplace debate. It is not a strict return to office structure, but it is also not a fully distributed remote-first organization. Instead, Netflix has landed on a quieter middle ground where flexibility exists, but is guided primarily by team-level decisions. One thing I would add here is that this kind of flexibility can look appealing on the surface, but it can also create ambiguity in practice. If every team decides its own working pattern, remote work stops being a company-wide principle and becomes a local decision. Your experience of working at Netflix could look completely different depending on which team you land in. One team might be largely remote, while another might expect people in the office several days a week. From the outside, that can make it difficult for candidates to understand exactly what they are signing up for. Another challenge appears when teams communicate with each other while working in different ways. A team operating remotely will often rely heavily on written communication. Decisions are documented, conversations take place in digital tools, and updates are shared asynchronously. Teams that spend more time together physically tend to move faster through in-person discussions. Ideas evolve during meetings, quick conversations at desks, or informal chats around the office. When those two rhythms meet, the remote team can sometimes find themselves slightly behind the conversation. The decision may eventually be written down, but the context behind that decision may have been shaped earlier through informal discussions. Over time, that can create small gaps in alignment between teams. And when you look a little closer, another pattern begins to appear. In many large companies, remote work tends to exist in very specific pockets of the organization. The roles that often have the most flexibility are the ones where talent is scarce and competition is intense. Engineering, data, and other specialized technical roles fall into that category. Those jobs operate in global talent markets. Restrict them to one office location, and the talent pool shrinks overnight. But in many other parts of the organization, expectations often drift back toward office hubs. So remote work starts to look less like a company philosophy and more like a hiring strategy. Offer it where you need leverage in the hiring market. Limit it where you do not. That seems to be a fashionable approach. To be clear, this has been happening for years. Companies have long made location exceptions for roles that are hard to fill. What has changed is that remote work has become much more visible and much more fashionable in recent years. And that makes the selectivity easier to see. The challenge now is that the number of fully remote companies continues to grow. Many of those businesses have remote work embedded directly into how their business functions. For those organizations, remote work is not a perk used to attract certain candidates. It is simply how the business functions. If remote work becomes one of the main selling points a company offers to candidates, then companies that provide it selectively may find themselves competing with organizations where remote work is the default. And in my humble opinion, the best fully remote organizations are likely to be the winners. That's it for today on the Remote Work Life podcast. Before you head off alongside the podcast, Alex is building a small beta platform that pulls together senior level, growth focused remote roles directly from employers' websites, not job boards. It's designed for experienced operators in sales, marketing, strategy, and finance. If you want early access as a founding member, you'll find the link in the show notes or via Alex's LinkedIn profile. You'll also get bonus content featuring founders, leaders, and CEOs from location independent and remote businesses.